Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and today I am here to talk about getting into Warcry on a budget. It's been a hot second since I've recorded. I'm just getting over COVID, so if I've got a weird voice or anything, you'll know why. What's so cool about kind of talking about budget with Warcry is that Warcry is one of GW's most accessible games, but there's still a lot of depth to it. Now, one thing about that depth is it can make it really difficult for people to sort of figure out which ways to get in are actually as accessible as they seem. So, I'm going to make this into a tier list for a few reasons. One is, let's be honest, the people cry out for tier lists. Now, I will never do, not never, never say never. At some point, maybe I'll get desperate for views and I'll do a competitive tier list. But the reason it's awkward to do a competitive tier list is because the new rules allowing 2 allies, 3 thralls, and a monster means that factions, or the concept of factions, are essentially meaningless at the highest tier of competitive play. There are some factions that can do a fairly pure list pretty well. There's certainly, you can win tournaments with a quote unquote pure list, but for the most part, the idea of a faction doesn't really exist. It's more about concepts and what the core interactions of a warband are. Now, that paradigm, whether you like it or not, I'm not a big fan of having it be quite that soupy, but it does cost a little bit more money for certain of these really soup heavy war bands. They can be quite a bit more expensive, but that doesn't mean that playing Warcry has to actually be more expensive. And as you'll see here, there are still competitive top tier lists that are really cheap. So I do think that doing a regular old-fashioned tier list makes a lot of sense when we're talking about budget and or casual warband lists in Warcry. So I'm absolutely going to be doing this as a budget faction tier list, and I'll update that casual tier list as well, since I know that people really loved that from last year. Now, when I think about a budget warband, the ideal budget warband to me is something that can hold its own, but you're almost never going to see a budget warband be meta defining, and that's okay. I'm not going to be upset about that, right? Now, what you will see, hopefully, is a few warbands here that can take down a tournament or do really well amongst your friends without costing much. And I will be doing this as kind of a two-part series. I'll do a follow-up video on, let's say, the 5 best one-box warbands, something like that. And you'll see kind of, in this video, you'll see a pretty good preview of what that's going to look like. Now, I do want to say, competitive warbands, even that aren't budget at all, they start only at around 110 or so. So while I say that this new paradigm costs more money, as far as there's more boxes that you have to buy at once to create a competitive warband, it still doesn't cost a ton of money compared to other GW games. It's just more expensive than Warcry 1.0 was. And we all know why that is. So let's get into it right away with Destruction. We'll start with the Greenskins, the Orcs, and Ironjawz. Now, they have a start collecting that makes a pretty solid warband, which is great to see. Though it is worth noting that the most competitive version requires a Mega Boss and a little bit of everything, to be honest. So that can be a little tough as far as sort of getting competitive with them, but there's a ton of great starts. For example, you have a one-box solution where you could just go 15 Ardboys, and you get a really amazing like objectives warband, but it won't be able to hunt, it won't be able to grab treasures, so you'll have like incredible strengths and really low weaknesses, but it is doable. So Ironjawz, I think, is like basically the definition of what I'm going to use as B here, where they have a lot of reasonable ways to start, but none of them really get you straight into the most powerful way to play it. So it that's just the perfect example, right? Of the competitive is tough to put together, but you can definitely get into the game pretty well with Ironjawz. Now, Kruleboyz are crazy. For just $60, you can eBay the Dominion half of Kruleboyz, and it's crazy. It gives you basically every option for them, and you can just mix and match and create Kruleboyz lists to your heart's content. Now, making competitive Cruel Boys is tricky, but that's okay, right? We're talking about budget, and here, if you just want to play Cruel Boys in Warcry and have like all the options, just getting Dominion gets you everything you need. Bone Splitters are interesting. You can get the Savage Orc box, so that's a pretty reasonable one box warband, and it's really versatile as long as you are good with only foot sloggers, 4-inch move foot sloggers. Now they do have the charge ability and they have wah, so if you're willing to use dice to get your movement, you can move around the board. But for the most part, you're still, when you're moving using dice to do it, you have sort of real limitations there. So it's a very medium warband. It's basically equivalent, honestly, of having a bespoke warband, but with less variety among your troops. It's still very doable. So if you like Bone Splitters, you can absolutely get into them for cheap. They're also getting a few points here for being probably the easiest rule set to proxy for generic Etsy orcs. There's a lot of just like somewhat naked-ish, poorly armored orcs out there on Etsy that you could just bring in and say, these are my Bone Splitters. And I think, to be honest, that that's the best use of Bone Splitters. I personally don't think Bone Splitters sculpts have held up much, but I'm not actually using aesthetics as part of the grading system here. So these are also a solid B. Now, looking at Gloomspite Gits, Gloomspite Gits are still very competitive, but the really good lists require at least 2 boxes, preferably 3 and an ally. I mean, it really adds up. Even just 2 boxes is really difficult to do. You could do, say, Sneaky Snufflers and maybe some Squig Hoppers, but I'm not a big fan of that. I'd want some netters too. You could get like just a box of grots and some Squig Hoppers. Maybe that's your best bet. But other than the netters, I don't really want to play any grots. Do you see where I'm going here? And unfortunately, the old Warcry box and Zarbag's Gits, which were 2 incredible ways to start Gloomspite. That's how I started my Gloomspite. You can't get those anymore. They're just gone. I've never seen them on eBay or anywhere lately. So they've gone from being one of the easiest factions to get into to absolutely one of the hardest, which I think is too bad. Ogres, on the other hand, you can still get a pretty functional one-box warband. Now, I think with Ogres, to make them competitive, you need to be using things from a few different boxes at a time. You need some of the fast things in Ogres, then you need some Gnoblars, then you need some heavy hitters. You're probably going to need to get at least 2 or 3 boxes for that. But the fact that one-box warbands are possible is really, really nice. And so I think that they definitely get a solid B for that, even if sort of making, leveraging them out fully and making them really good requires a ton of options. Ogres are doing really well in tournaments right now, but right now just as allies. I still think, though, that competitive Ogres are possible. Now into the Death Grand Alliance, and we're into Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Ossiarch Bone Reapers are very competitive, but I think if you're building them, you kind of want to have one of everything. You probably want a Morghast, you probably want a Stalker, you want a bunch of Mortek, you want another hero that's not one of those. That's like 4 boxes right there I just named. So it's really difficult to actually make really good Ossiarch Bone Reapers for under about 150 or so, which is tough. And it's tough because also 1 box of Mortek doesn't make a real warband. Sometimes you'll win some games just because Mortek are so cheap, but you just don't have real options there. So I would put Ossiarch Bone Reapers at D. It just takes too many different things to get into them for cheap. But Ossiarch Bone Reapers, if you're willing to spend a bunch of money, they are pretty powerful. Soulblight Gravelords, they have a start collecting set, which is really good. It makes a very good warband, but it's kind of hard to expand past it. You would need to get a bunch more boxes, right? Just 1 box wouldn't do it. You'd need to get skeletons, and then you'd need to get a big flyer. That's 2 separate boxes that aren't in the start collecting. So if you want to get the most competitive sort of juice out of Soulblight Gravelords, you'll have to do quite a bit of collecting. But if you don't want to do all that, the start collecting box is excellent. You'll use that White King. You'll use all those Graveguard. You'll use those skeletons on skeletal horses. you'll use all that and you'll make a pretty solid list, and you won't be worried that you're not getting like the most absolutely cutthroat version of SBG out there. So I think to me that's again like the definition of a B here. Very very doable if you want to, if you just want to dip your toes into Soulblight Gravelords. The one thing making it not be higher, even with this amazing start collecting, is start collecting boxes are still like over $100 without discounts, and a lot of the ones in A or S tier, you can get more options for way less money. So let's get into kind of the freaky stuff of death, the ghosts and the weird creepy ghouls. Night Haunt are cool because they're not crap anymore. In 1.0, they were sort of memed on as one of the worst factions. That actually ended before 1.0 ended. Once we went to 4 rounds, Night Haunt got a lot better. Right now, though, most of the time when you're playing Night Haunt in a competitive sense, you're playing them as allies. Night Haunt are good, but the troops aren't very good. It's only the leaders that are good because of their amazing ability. So that can be a little tough if you really care about them competitively, but it kind of frees you up otherwise. You can get ETB, easy to build kits, still from when they were brand new in 2nd edition, that let you build Night Haunt really cheaply. You just have to mix and match with a few different easy to build kits. So these are kind of, I considered putting them in A because the overall price can be pretty cheap. But the issue there is that you have to be really creative with yourself about which ones you put together. It's not just one purchase that you do. It's like 3 or 4 kits, but they're all really cheap kits. It's like $15 to $25. So combining 3 or 4 of them is a little more expensive than a 1-box warband, but less expensive than most 2-box warbands. So it's a nice thing, but it's also kind of requires a bit of effort. Flesh Eater Courts have that amazing start collecting box, one of the best sort of plastic for your money buys of any faction anywhere. Though I am actually removing some points here because if you built yours in 1.0, you got maximum punished. That's, of course, what I did. And everything that was good in 1.0 is not really what's good in 2.0 now. And so that hurts a little bit. My 1.0 warband is still playable. I only lost 1 ghoul. But losing an entire ghoul really hurts. And it also just hurts that the other stuff is better now, right? So that's okay though, because you still have a ton of options if you go get it. It's just that building cheaper than the start collecting isn't really possible. You can't just get, say, a box of ghouls and a clam pack and have a usable warband. And then that incredible Broken Realms box, I haven't seen it anywhere. It's really hard to find. That was probably the best way to get into them ever in Warcry. That would have put them at absolutely S tier if that was still around, but you don't really see it. These also get used more as allies, just using the Vargulf, which actually isn't in the start collecting box, which is also a little bit painful. So this is all kind of just like with Soulblight Gravelords, just like with Ironjawz, kind of dropping them down even though they have a really good start collecting box. So B tier is still fine. You know, if you're willing to buy a start collecting box to get into a warband, these are going to be great. It's just they're not going to be much cheaper than that. Now getting into dwarves in order. We're going to start with Fyreslayers, which don't have a start collecting box and don't have any 1-box solution. There's some reasonable ways to get 2-box warbands. So like if you get a box of Volkites and then a treasure carrying ally, so you'd get something outside of Fyreslayers, but something that could carry treasure, whether it was going to be like Idoneth Eels or maybe Stormcast Prosecutors, right? And you just like make 2 primes or something like that, or 2 Lokian Princes or something like that. You can get really far that way with Fyreslayers, and you can find some solutions there that aren't too expensive, but that's a little tenuous. Fyreslayers competitively are actually in an okay place. You don't see people play them much, just because I think people just generally don't like Fire Slayers. They don't have a lot of fans. But if you like Fire Slayers, you can play them very effectively in Warcry. You'll just need a treasure carrying ally. You really only need one. And then, uh, you know, you would start with Volkites if you were doing it trying to be as cheap as possible, though that's not very cheap. But you can do other things as well. Yeah, lots you can do with Fire Slayers. I'll list build with them another time on the channel, but getting into them on a budget can be a little bit difficult. Same is true with Kharadron Overlords, the Techno Dwarves. Their start collecting box is not very Warcry friendly. Most of the stuff in there, Thunderers, one of the Thunderers is good. The rest of them took a lot of really big nerfs in 2.0. The balloon leaders are really good, but the non-leader balloons are not good. And then, of course, you can't even play the boats, right? Luckily, it does mean that people eBay the balloons for cheap, so that can be kind of nice. And the other thing here that kind of made me consider putting them in B is that one box of Arkanauts is an extremely effective, competitive 610 to 650 points. Now you have to pair that to get something or with something else to get a really powerful warband. But as far as a functional warband, you can put a box of Arkanauts together with some of the cheaper eBay balloon boys or something and get a reasonable 2-box band that way. So again, no 1-box solution. The 2-box solutions are kind of difficult, but it can work. And just so you know, Kharadron Overlords are very competitive right now. They're extremely good in the meta if that's something you care about. So let's get into the humans of order. We're going to start with Cities of Sigmar, which have a ton of very cheap but also impossible to find 1-box kits. Things like getting the free guild, hand weaponers, basically, because it's one kit that'll make the big swords, the halberds, the spears, right? And you can kind of mix and match those to your heart's content. Things like that give you a lot of really good budget options. The problem is they're impossible to find. You will not see them at your local game store unless you live in England. Even then, I doubt you will. They're mostly on order from GW, and we're not supposed to talk about this, but they're all going to be squatted in about 6 months. They probably won't be removed from Warcry officially until, say, 6 months after that. So, you'll get a year out of your Cities of Sigmar, but really I would stay away. I would really stay away from Cities of Sigmar right now. So I'm giving them an F. But if you live in Nottingham, then they're an A, because the kits are so cheap that you might not care that they're going to be out of the game in a year. And who knows, maybe you can just proxy them for whatever comes along after. For Stormcast, we're going to start with the Thunderstrike Stormcast, and they are probably the best solution in the entire game for getting into the game cheaply. Because if you eBay the Dominion half of Thunderstrike, you have multiple different top-tier competitive warbands at your disposal. As far as getting tippity-top, you need to bring in a couple allies, but you can make very competitive, sort of capable of winning tournament lists just with that Dominion half, and that's really cool. So I think that's the only place where that is true in the entire game right now. When I did something like this a year and a half ago, that was not the case. There were a bunch of 1-box warbands that were absolutely among the top tier of the game. For example, Flesh Eater Courts could do it, Skaven could do it, etc. There were a bunch of options. Now, I would say Thunderstrike are the only one, Stormcast Thunderstrike. So this easily puts them number one in the whole game. Absolutely, if you're interested in a really powerful warband that you can get for really, really cheap, and a warband that some people love and some people hate, go with Thunderstrike. How about the other Stormcast? Well, I'll start with Sacrosanct Chamber. Competitively, Sacrosanct are in a really good place, but they're really awkward to collect because you could get, say, a box of Thundercats, but then they don't quite fill out a warband. You need one more model, so now all of a sudden you've got to get another one. And you probably don't want to just do 3 Thundercats. I mean, you could, but it's a little awkward. The points are a little awkward. So I think to kind of run Sacrosanct the way that I'd want to run them, I'd want like at least three $60 boxes, and that's kind of rough. If you are good at finding deals on single models, they can be a lot easier because you might only want one Thundercat, or you might only want, say, one Castigator, stuff like that. And so that can be really good if you, say, maybe split a box of something with someone. You could make that work. But otherwise, I would say they're just really difficult to collect, just kind of awkward to do on a budget. But they are very good if you love those robes. Vanguard, the Birdie, the Birdie Stormcast. Uh, Again, they're in a good place competitively. Someone went undefeated in a pretty large tournament, 3 wins and a draw with Vanguard pretty recently. They're good. They're a valid like one box plus a clam pack ally solution, right? Something like if you just got Vanguard Hunters plus a little ally, you could do that. But points are kind of awkward. Like their their start collecting box is a little awkward on points, and the points are a little awkward on just getting a thing of Vanguard Hunters. But they are good, and just one box and an ally clan pack works perfectly. So that's basically the definition of B, where it's not even just 2 boxes, it's just like one box and then any ally you want, any sort of good fighter that you had laying around your house, or if you're new to the game, just one of those random little packs, and you can do them pretty well. Original recipe Chonk Cast are the Warrior Chamber, and they have one of the best start collecting boxes in the game. It's amazing. It gives you a million options, everything you could ever want to play with them. They have a bunch of different things in the faction that are really good. So, you know, all of the paladins are really good. Liberators are really good. Prosecutors are really good, although I would never advise running more than one. Same is true of judicators. Some of the judicators are good, some of them are not. I would never run more than one judicator, but they are all good. And the other thing you can do is liberators, because they have a million options, the points aren't awkward the way they are with, say, like Vanguard Hunters, where Vanguard Hunters are really good, but it's hard to make a warband that's just them. Liberators, you can absolutely just do one box and have a box of a functional warband of only liberators, and that's great. I love that. So these are absolutely A tier. They're close to being S. Maybe once we get to the end here, I'll kind of regret it and bump them up to S. We'll see. But overall, I would just say Liberators are amazing. Going into Elves, everyone's favorite. We'll start with Daughters of Cain. They have a Warcry box still available with some Witch Elves and some Snake Ladies. The issue here with Daughters of Cain, normally I wouldn't dock points for this, but the most desirable piece, the Bloodrack Medusa, every time someone looks at the Daughters of Cain ability cards and fighter cards, goes, man, that's the fighter I want to play, is the Bloodrack Medusa. It's locked behind a like $1 zillion box that you just can't get, and it comes with 2 other heroes that you won't ever use, and a big knife carriage that you're just going to throw away because it only works in Big Hammer. So that can be a little frustrating. So the Warcry box gives you kind of a slightly neutered version of the warband. It's still reasonable. I think Sisters of Slaughter are perfectly reasonable. I think that the various snake options are pretty decent. So I'm giving them a B because that Warcry box does give you a perfectly functional warband for around the $80 mark, which is nice. But as soon as you can't find that anymore, then this is absolute F. This is one of the hardest warbands in the game to put together, so that can be tough. Shadow Stalkers, I'm going to punt to the next section, or the bespoke section. So I'll get to Lumineth. Lumineth have an excellent Warcry box that gives you 5 each of their best fighter, which is perfect. Their 2 best fighters, sorry. Wardens are really good. And then the Stone Guard, Allarus Stone Guard, are also really good. And you get 5 of each with the Warcry box. It's amazing. It gives you a amazing warband. Now, the leader options there aren't that great, so if you're going competitive, you'd probably get that Warcry box plus another leader somewhere, and then that would be your competitive list. But otherwise, it's amazing, and the fact that it comes that close to being a really highly competitive warband, and it would be really good out of the box, casually, it would smash a lot of lists just out of the box there. So that on its own is enough to get them up to A. But you also have the Arcane Cataclysm half, which is the most recent FOMO box. It's still around. You can still get people breaking down just the halves of it. You can get the Lumineth half of Arcane Cataclysm. And right now, it doesn't have the things that are best in the warband. I think it has the horses, the archers, and the blade lords. And I don't know what leader it has. I can check. It's got the Enlightener leader, which is okay, but not like burning down the doors. It's perfectly usable though. So the thing that's cool about Arcane Cataclysm is that it's a lot of plastic for how much you pay for it, and all of it is usable in Warcry, which most of these FOMO boxes, not everything is usable in Warcry, so it's not a great deal for us. And then it ends up not being a great deal in AOS either, because, you know, for whatever army you do, you're just not going to be using very much of it. The cool thing here, though, is yes, it's weak right now, but if you don't care about that, it's just a lot of plastic, and it's going to be everything that's bad in the faction right now, so I guarantee next time they adjust points, some of that will turn good, and you'll have a pretty good warband on your hands. So you kind of have two different solutions there. The issue is that 2-box solutions are really expensive because all the Lumineth boxes are some of the most expensive boxes in the game. So I would say once these 2 limited release boxes leave, like once the Warcry box isn't around, once the Arcane Cataclysm box isn't around, this is going to go down to a D. All right, so how about the order, just plants and animals? For Sylvaneth, they don't have a start collecting box. Kurnoths and Tree Revenants make a truly competitive list for the same price as a start collecting box, so that's actually kind of cool. The thing that doesn't make that compelling is that start collecting boxes that are usable in Warcry, there's just so much more plastic than in just a 2-box solution, and so they give you a little bit more insulation for edition changes. Like let's say in Warcry 3.0, all of a sudden Revenants aren't good anymore and Kurnoths are just kind of average, and it's all about the Bug Riders and the Archers and Dryads, and then all of a sudden you did this 2-box thing and you're totally out of luck. Whereas in a lot of start collecting box options for the same price as this 2-box solution, you would have a whole bunch more plastic, and so you would at least have some of something that's good. So that can be a little bit tough. The one nice thing is that limited releases have happened recently for Sylvaneth. They've had a, what do you call those, end of year Christmas boxes. They had a FOMO box not that long ago. So you've got some options as far as finding things on eBay for them. You can also just get the Vanguard box and sell the Tree Lord if you're really good at selling individual models, or that feels comfortable for you. So you've got options for Sylvaneth. You've also can do Dryads plus a Clan Pack hero. That's not going to be as strong as Kurnoths and Revenants, but it is going to be very functional. I think Dryads are pretty good. They're very good at shredding Stormcast, I'll tell you that. So I would say they're nice. They've got a ton of different options, although none of the options are perfect, so that kind of kept them out of A tier, but they're very, very good. And if you like Sylvaneth and you're maybe disappointed at how they play in AOS, which I know I've heard that a lot of people are, I think their AOS playstyle, from what I've heard, is just very I guess the word a lot of them use is Marmite, but it's just very distinct and not something that's for everyone. You've got a few different play styles in Warcry that you can lean into, and so that's pretty cool. Seraphon The start collecting Saurus is a pretty solid way to start. Saurus are okay. Saurus Knights are okay. The one thing that hurts here is in 1.0, start collecting Skinks was better. So if you jumped into Seraphon in 1.0 and you were just doing it for Warcry, now you have a pretty garbage warband. And I wouldn't be surprised to see all that keep flip-flopping. We've also heard rumors that everything that you can buy right now will be range refreshed. It's not as 100% true as, let's say, the Cities of Sigmar rumors, so I'm not docking them points here, but just, I'm going to say this is a B unless you're worried about how... If you don't think Saurus models are cool, and for example, I've got here a bullet point saying that the Saurus clan pack, Saurus box plus your favorite clan pack hero is a really good option, and it is, because Saurus are cheaper than the average battle line right now, and then you could just get a hero. Only do that if you would play the current Saurus models, even if newer ones existed, because they might get obsoleted soon. They won't just ditch the unit, right? They'll just refresh the unit. But just only do it if you like the current Saurus models, which I think most people don't really. And if you really love Skinks, that's cool, play them, but just realize that they're not very good. The start collecting Skinks will give you a functional warband, though. Again, that's why these can't drop below B. They just have so many different options. But just be aware that it behooves you to be careful with getting into Seraphon right now. Let's go into the Animals of Chaos after going through the kind of Animals and Wildlife of Order. Beasts of Chaos have an incredible start collecting box. If you like Beasts of Chaos and you just want to play them for Warcry, go for it. No regrets at just getting that start collecting box. Beasts of Chaos are cool because there's not a lot of garbage in their roster, but it does still take a lot of skill to build lists with them, which I really like. The place where that gets you somewhere is all those battle line kits. They're all really cheap, right? They have like a lot of different $35 battle line kits, which is just really nice when most factions now, their battle line is going for $60. So you can kind of mix and match really well. A 2-box solution for Beasts of Chaos is way better than a 2-box solution for most other factions, because it's, $70 instead of $120, right? So there's a lot you can do with Beasts of Chaos, which I think puts them pretty comfortably in A, and just an amazing place to start Warcry if you don't mind those old sculpts. And also knowing that those old sculpts won't be refreshed anytime soon. Now, the one thing that's kind of nice there is there's a lot of great Etsy sculpts for Beasts of Chaos, so you can kind of go that direction. Skaven don't have a start collecting box anymore, which is too bad. Although the Pestilence start collecting wasn't really good for Warcry anyway. All the cool stuff in it wasn't Warcry eligible. You can make a functional, decent, reasonable list, actually pretty good list, out of Rat Ogres plus any battle line. Whether you want to do Plague Monks, whether you want to do Clan Rats, whether you want to do Storm Vermin, whichever one you like the look of best. If you get that plus the Rat Ogre kit, which is 2 Rat Ogres and 3 Pack Masters, that's going to be a very reasonable kind of semi-competitive warband, and that's solid. I mean, great. The one issue there, again, the thing of if you're just building it out of 2 boxes, you're very limited on options as points change, as additions change. Now, I don't expect that to happen for another year, but hey, if you're watching this 6 months from now because you're just like wanting to get into Warcry and you're looking at the budget videos that are available to you, just know that the cheapest ways to get into Skaven, they're very effective right now, but they might not be forever because, you would have to limit yourself there. Still cool, though, because not a lot of warbands can get you as powerful a warband for as cheap as Skaven can. Khorne Bloodbound, the Gore Chosen start collecting box is excellent. It's just like the original recipe Stormcast start collecting box, where you just have a bajillion options. A bunch of them are pretty reasonable in Warcry right now. Like Blood Warriors and Blood Reavers are both completely reasonable ways to sort of set up the backbone of your Khorne warband. It'll come with a Korgorath, which are really good right now. Comes with a bunch of different heroes. A few of them are pretty good right now, and a few of them are not. But as editions change, I'm sure that'll shuffle around. So lots of options, both where you can build some of the most powerful stuff that the warband is capable of right now. The only power pieces that I feel like you'd be missing, that I'd be sad about missing, are you'd want that Wrathmonger leader out of that Wrathmonger box, and you'd want the Juggerlord, who I think is really good. That's the Juggernaut leader, the Lord of Khorne on Juggernaut, right? But everything else is in that box, and that's incredible. So you can absolutely make some of the most competitive Bloodbound warbands out of that box. So that's so cool. Demons, I put them in B on the picture, but then I talked myself out of it. Bloodletters and Fleshhounds do make a functional, good warband. But like I said before, that's really narrow on options. And also the faction just has so many larger issues. Normally I wouldn't dock a sort of budget accessibility ranking based on how flexible a faction is, but this faction literally has half as many abilities as every other faction. They don't have leader abilities, and it's very frustrating to play with them, and you feel it when you play with them, where they don't have a ton of options, and then they also have just fewer abilities and tricksy things than a bespoke warband does, which can be tough. So I wouldn't suggest getting into Khorne Demons just for Warcry at the moment, but if you really love them, Bloodletters and Fleshhounds are very doable. Let's talk about Tzeentch. Arcanites go straight to S tier because they probably have, I said contender for, they are the best one-box warband in Warcry. So if you just get a box of Zangor, you're in a great spot. You have a very good warband right off the bat. The Zangor leader isn't very good, but every option in that Zangor box is really solid. And this is something where, because the Zangor box builds 4 different fighters, and they're all good right now, but as the edition changes, I'm sure 1 or 2 of them will get bad, but you'll still have some. I doubt that all 4 types of Zangor are going to get bad. So that one box warband kind of insulates you a little bit more than most of them would. The other amazing way to start collecting Arcanites, which is what I did, is getting the Arcane Cataclysm half. That gets you Zangor, it gets you Zangor on disc, it gets you Carrick Acolytes, it gets you the incredible new model that's like an armored Tzeentch Chaos Lord, but with a weird Birdman coming out of his shoulder. I think he's called the Curseling. He looks amazing. He's right now in Warcry, he's kind of average. He's playable casually, but he's not competitive, and that's okay. I'm still going to play him narratively when I manage to paint him up. But just as far as giving you all the options for a warband for pretty cheap, if you kind of eBay it, that's incredible. So Arcane Cataclysm right now is keeping Arcanites absolutely in S tier, both in terms of the one box warband and in terms of this. It's just amazing. So right now is an amazing time to get into Arcanites if you want to, but that Zangor box will still be there even once you can't find Arcane Cataclysm anymore. Tzeentch Demons are kind of the opposite. They don't suck, right? Like, they're a very functional warband. I don't have anything bad to say about Demons anymore. In 1.0, they were in a really bad place, but now in 2.0, they can do some stuff. The issue is that to get the most out of their mechanics, I think you need to get at least 3 boxes, because you're getting the pink horrors, and then the blues, and the brimstones, and then, you're also getting either flamers or screamers or things like that, right? So I've heard some people say you actually want to skip the pink horrors and go straight to blues, and then just the blues split into brimstones, and that's it. But even then, you don't have a leader in that box, so you need to get a leader, and then another troop that's going to give you some, some movement, and so it's difficult, right? So it's difficult to put together an option of Tzeentch Demons, but at least, hey, they used to be terrible in-game. Now they're at least good in-game. It's just you probably need to be actually playing them in AOS to put them together. So let's talk about Nurgle now. I'll start with Maggotkin. There's another one here where they were terrible in 1.0 just in terms of on the tabletop. They don't suck anymore, so that's nice. But they're still kind of awkward to collect. You could go with Blight Kings and Flies, but as two box warbands go, that's a pretty expensive way to do it. That's the price of a start collecting with very few options, where it's actually kind of awkward to fit them together points wise. Uh, so I've seen people do well with Maggotkin, but it's often like bringing in a separate ally like a Varengard, and bringing in a Varengard disqualifies you from being on the budget list because it's so expensive for that box. Less expensive if you're splitting it. If you buy a box of Varengard and then you and two friends each take one of them, and that's just going to be your ally that you put in all your chaos bands. That can work pretty well, but that's kind of a separate question, right? And even then, that's like $35 for one model. Now, demons, if you can find the old start collecting box, that's great. Otherwise, you're in a really rough spot. Again, just like in Maggotkin, Plague Bearers plus drones is functional, but it's not really what you want, but it can work. So the fact that there's sort of functional two box warbands, but not like the way you'd want to play them necessarily, I think is kind of classic C tier here. Where if you love these factions and are cash strapped, you can do it. But I would only do it if I was if I was in love with these factions. I wouldn't sort of start the game with them otherwise. One note though, if you get that Vanguard box, if you're interested in getting both Maggotkin and the demons, if you get that Vanguard box, everything in that box is Warcry playable and like pretty good in Warcry, and that's pretty nice. Now let's talk about Slaanesh. Sybarites, they have a Warcry box still around. That's really nice. It makes a functional warband, but kind of an awkward one where I just don't love Bliss Barbs, and I don't know anyone who's played Sybarites who does like them. And so that's tough. But you do get, the armor folks with that one. That's either the Painbringers or the Twin Souls. That can be nice as a way to start them, but otherwise, everything else is pretty expensive for what it is. You can get various two box functional warbands, but again, they're expensive two box warbands. But as long as that Warcry box is still around, I'm going to keep them in B tier. I won't drop them into C until you can't find it anymore. Now, the Demons side, there's a few different things you can do. They still have a start collecting box for Slaanesh Demons, so that's cool. You can also do like Demonettes plus Fiends, and that works pretty well. Demonettes still aren't that expensive compared to a lot of other battle line yet, so Demonettes plus Fiends is cheaper than a start collecting box would be elsewhere. So that can be good. If everything in the start collecting box was usable, like if those chariots were something else that you could then use in Warcry, I'd be putting these happily into A tier. But overall, I would say Slaanesh Demons are just very doable if you really like them. Again, I'm not ranking them as one of these top ones for getting into the game, but if you like Slaanesh Demons and you're short on budget, you're feeling fine about it. You can just get the start collecting box. You can just get, two boxes, and they won't be the most expensive boxes in the world. So that's pretty nice. We've also got a FOMO box coming out for these, and Khorne coming up soon. Now, Khorne, I doubt the FOMO box that's coming will be the best way to get into them, just because that start collecting is so good. But it might become the best way to get into Slaanesh and Warcry. So keep your eye out for that. I know it's not cool to say FOMO boxes are a good thing, but for people who hawk eBay, they are a good thing. And so use that to your advantage. Now let's talk about the poster boys of of Chaos. These are the Stormcast of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness. Marauders plus a hero is a functional, and I would say more than functional, powerful warband, because Slaves to Darkness have a lot of really good, foot slogging foot heroes, but really good and powerful for what they are. The problem is, even removing what I think about Marauders as sculpts, which I get it, I've harped on that too much, but that's still just like, it's all of your people are on foot. There's only a very small amount of options. And I would bet, and I don't have any real evidence for this, but I would bet next time we get points for Slaves to Darkness, they'll make Marauders the least interesting thing to be doing in the faction because every other sculpt is so new that I assume they'll want to sell them. That's a little bit tinfoil hatty, so feel free to ignore. Marauders are really good, so if you want to get into Warcry on the cheap, you could say Slaves to Darkness should be up in B tier because Marauders plus a hero is, a very solid way to do it. One note, because of all that new stuff that's in there, if Sybarites or Lumineth are anything to go by, they'll wait about 18 months or so, and then they'll package all those sprues together in a really cheap sort of group box, and you'll be able to get them really cheaply right now, or at that point. But right now they're really expensive, and all of the new releases are tough to get. So if you're willing to wait on Slaves to Darkness, I bet you get some good deals in about a year and a half. So let's go into bespokes. They're kind of hard to put together. Now, every bespoke gives you a functional warband with one box. That's cool. Not all of those warbands, your definition of functional may vary, right? As far as like how in games you're going to feel. But some of these warbands give you actually competitive lists that could win a tournament with two boxes. And that's really cool, right? So having something that's both solid out of one box, good out of, winning out of two boxes, that can be really nice. So let's kind of go through the list here, right? There's only one that I think is both decent with just one box and is competitive if you just get two boxes and that's it. No allies, no nothing. And I would say Iron Golems. They're going to struggle with treasure missions or anything where they have to be fast, but they're so hitty, they're so killy that they're absolutely going to put you in the mix in any of the missions that don't require just like screaming across the board. They're a lot like Stormcast that way, where they're one ally away from being absolutely tournament winning, but even without an ally, they're so good at fighting that they can actually get by really nicely. So I would say with two boxes of Iron Golems, you can just roll into a tournament if you have a pretty good sense of how you like to play them and which fighters you like the best. Yeah, they were such a meme in 1.0 that I think people have really slept on them, but in 2.0 they're very, very good. Then we have a bunch of the new factions, and I would say this is probably going to be the paradigm going forward, where two boxes plus an ally is going to give you a very competitive list. Now, that's a little expensive, but all of these are also very, very functional from a casual setting with just one box. I kind of made the mistake of, in my review of Horns of Ashut and Jade Obelisk, kind of talking about how much I felt like, here's what I would do with allies, here's what I would do with lots of boxes, all this brewing, and then I think people felt a little bit put off by the idea that you just couldn't do it with one box. With Jade Obelisk, you absolutely can. With Horns of Ashut, with Rotmire Creed, with Chaos Legionnaires, and then also Spire Tyrants from 1.0. All of those are perfectly fine with one box. It's just that with two boxes and an ally, they like really sing, and they give you the opportunity to win any tournament you enter, and that's really cool. So all of those are going to go straight into A. And I would say at this point, if you're kind of trying to play on the cheap, I would say everything in S and A that you see here is just an amazing way to get into the game. Now, some of the other bespokes, not really going to get you into competitive very well, but are very functional. So things like Tarantulos Brood, Corvus Cabal, Scions of the Flame, Darko Savagers, Untamed Beasts, all of those are very functional. I didn't put Splintered Fang on the list here, but they're with that as well. Where one box may be a little bit disappointing as far as if you end up running against sort of pretty well-tuned lists. But once you get two boxes, you'll feel like you can go toe-to-toe with pretty well-tuned lists. And maybe you'll be a little bit behind from a competitive standpoint, but you won't be getting totally blown out of the water. And also, a lot of people talk about Splintered Fang, the hero, as one of the top allies in the game. And I don't think those people are crazy. So the last section, and I'm putting them all in C tier, is the ones where not all of these are garbage, right? But they all require just major, major effort to make them functional or competitive. So, like Cypher Lords, the Unmade, K-Knight Shadow Stalkers, you have to get multiple boxes, also bring in an ally, and then you aren't even getting sort of competitive, you're getting just like reasonable. And then Hunters of Wanchi, you can absolutely get competitive with them, but the amount of converting that you have to do is crazy. Now, I actually know two people who are doing that for some reason. I guess the aesthetic is just so attractive that a lot of people kind of want the challenge. So I do, meta wise, you probably will be running into Hunters of Wanchi quite a bit, but getting into them on a budget, or if you're new to the game, I would say stay away, because it just takes a crazy amount of effort. Uh, I also forgot Ideneth when I was first creating this. They're in D tier. They're terrible. You can get creative with Ideneth, but not really on a budget. They have an okay Vanguard box, but Vanguard boxes are so much more than Start Collectings were that I'm just nixing them out of this video, because at that point, it's like you just have so many better options and so many better warbands. So here's the final tier list, and I've kind of reordered some of the tiers to kind of reflect some of the highlights. Really, everything in this S and A tier: Stormcast Thunderstrike, Tzeentch Mortals, Cruel Boys, Iron Golems, Stormcast Warriors, Khorne Humans, or Khorne Bloodbound, Horns of Hashut, Beasts of Chaos, Lumineth Realm Lords, Jade Obelisk, Rotmire Creed, Chaos Legionnaires, and Spire Tyrants. Man, my voice is having a rough time. But those are the factions, I would say. If you don't know what faction you want to play, but you know you want to get into Warcry, you know you want to kind of dabble in the AOS model range, those are the factions that I would say are the ones to get into, where you can build functional, solid warbands for very cheaply or with very few boxes to get. Everything in B tier, if you like that warband and you're new, it's still, easily built enough that you should absolutely go for it over something in S and A tier, because just painting and playing what you love is going to be the most important thing. Now, for the stuff in C, all of these are going to be a real challenge, but they're going to be doable if you just really, really like that faction. So, just be aware of that going in, and then you'll be okay. Everything in D, if you're not already pretty invested in them, you are going to have a tough time if you want to get into them as a new player. And that's okay. I mean, even the least accessible Warcry warband is still way more accessible than the most accessible Big Hammer army. But it's going to be tough. And so, if you were kind of vaguely interested in one of these C or D tier ones, but you have a S or A where you like them too, maybe I would go for the easier one. So I'm going to be bringing in some more Warcry content in the future. I also have a non-Warcry video, non-gaming video that I'm really excited about coming up soon. We'll see if my voice recovers. I don't know if I can do another one of these voice box shredding hour-long sessions, but until those next videos, may all your rolls be crits.